In the days that followed the discovery, silence settled over both households like a heavy fog. The laughter that once echoed through the compound had been replaced with long, quiet stares and awkward, half-finished conversations. Mrs. Adewora and Mrs. Ijeoma, though shaken, leaned on each other in ways they hadn't before. They no longer simply greeted each other across the veranda, they sat together for hours, talking, reflecting, sometimes crying. Daniel, once brimming with excitement, now kept to himself. He rarely touched the phone that had brought so much trouble. The sleek device, once his greatest prize, now felt like a source of shame. Amara, too, had changed. She barely smiled at school, her cheerful voice gone quiet in the classroom. One evening, after a long day of market trading, Mrs. Adewora entered Daniel's room. He sat on the floor, his books scattered around him, though he wasn't studying. He looked up, and their eyes met. She sat beside him slowly. "I'm not angry anymore," she said softly. "But I am scared. Scared that I didn't see what was happening, that I didn't protect you well enough." Daniel's lips trembled. "I didn't mean to. Mama, I just wanted to be like the other kids. I didn't know it would go that far." "I know," she whispered, pulling him into a tight hug. "That's why we're going to fix this. Together." Across the compound, a similar moment played out. Mrs. Ijeoma sat beside Amara, holding her daughter's small hand in both of hers. "You're still my girl, Amara," she said, brushing a braid behind her ear. "What happened doesn't define you. But we have to be strong enough to learn from it." Therapy sessions continued, not only for the children but also for the mothers. A family counselor visited every week, teaching them how to talk openly, how to listen without judgment, and how to rebuild trust. Gradually, the weight of secrecy and shame began to lift. Mrs. Adewora and Mrs. Ijeoma also organized a community parents forum at the local primary school. They invited other mothers and fathers to talk about the risks of unsupervised technology use, creating a space where stories could be shared without fear or judgment. It wasn't perfect. There were still difficult days, nights when Daniel would cry quietly in bed, or moments when Amara froze up in the middle of class. But those moments no longer existed in silence. They were met with support, with comfort, with action. One bright Saturday morning, Daniel and Amara sat outside on the porch again. No phone between them. Just a pair of board games and a bowl of oranges. Daniel nudged her gently and smiled. "Want to play?" Amara smiled back, her first real smile in weeks. "Only if you promise not to cheat." They laughed, and for a moment, the compound felt alive again. And somewhere nearby, the mothers watched quietly, knowing their children's innocence had been shaken, but not destroyed. There was still work to do, but the healing had truly begun. As the weeks turned into months, change rippled not just through the two households, but throughout the entire community. News of the incident, though initially whispered behind closed doors, soon became the catalyst for a broader conversation. Parents who once dismissed the dangers of smartphones now sat up and listened. The Community Parents Forum, spearheaded by Mrs. Adewora and Mrs. Ijeoma, grew steadily. What began as a circle of 5 women under a mango tree soon turned into a formal gathering at the community center, with fathers, teachers, and even pastors attending. They discussed screen time limits, monitoring apps, and, most importantly, the importance of building trust with their children. For the first time, many parents admitted they didn't know what their children were doing online. And for the first time, they were willing to learn. Meanwhile, Daniel and Amara were slowly rediscovering themselves, not as curious children lost in secrecy, but as young people learning the value of openness. At school, their teachers were discreet but attentive. A guidance counselor, newly assigned to the school through the forum's advocacy, began holding weekly sessions with the students. One day, after such a session, Daniel raised his hand. The classroom fell silent. "Sir," he said, hesitantly, "why don't we have a class about digital safety? Like, something we all learn before we get phones." The counselor looked surprised and impressed. "That's a very good question, Daniel. Maybe that's something we can start together." From that moment, a new initiative was born. A digital responsibility club, co-led by Daniel and Amara with support from the school staff, where students could learn not just how to use technology, but how to protect themselves, ask questions, and speak up when something felt wrong. Daniel found a new kind of confidence, not rooted in the shiny phone he once craved, but in purpose. Amara, too, grew stronger. She began journaling, pouring her thoughts and feelings into poems and short stories. One of her stories, titled The Locked Door, was read aloud during the school's cultural day. Parents listened in stunned silence as she described, through fiction, the confusion of discovering something too big for a child to understand, and the strength it took to speak up. After the applause faded, Mrs. Ijeoma hugged her daughter tightly. "You are so brave," she whispered. "I'm proud of the girl you are becoming." One evening, months later, as the sun dipped low behind the rooftops, Daniel and Amara sat on the compound steps again, older, wiser, still bonded. They watched the younger kids chase each other around the dusty yard. "Logan." Daniel turned to her. "You think we'll ever forget what happened?" Amara looked ahead. "I don't think we should. But we'll be okay. We already are." Mrs. Adewora and Mrs. Ijeoma sat on opposite verandas, watching their children. They exchanged a glance and a knowing smile, not of mothers who had failed, but of mothers who had faced the darkness and decided to be light. Because healing doesn't erase the past. It transforms it into wisdom. And in this small corner of the world, where dust clings to sandals and stories pass from mouth to ear, two families learned what it means to fall, to get up, and to rise stronger than before. 3 years later. Daniel adjusted the collar of his school uniform in the hallway mirror, now taller, leaner, his once round face sharper with maturity. He slipped his books into his backpack, then glanced at the framed certificate hanging on the wall, Youth Digital Responsibility Champion, awarded to Daniel Obi. It reminded him daily of where he had come from, and what he had overcome. Across the compound, Amara was packing her poetry notebook into her bag. At 15, she had become a voice of calm strength in her school. Her writing, once personal, had now become her advocacy. She was invited to speak at school assemblies, sometimes even local radio, using her poems to teach both children and parents about emotional safety, technology, and healing. The past wasn't forgotten, it was just no longer a wound. It had become a lesson. The bond between them remained strong, though it had matured. They no longer sat around watching cartoons or laughing over silly videos. Now, they discussed books, school goals, and sometimes, their dreams. One afternoon, Amara sat under the mango tree where the original parents' forum had once met. Daniel joined her, dropping his bag beside hers. "I was thinking," he said, "we could host a workshop for younger kids. Like a tech and trust club." "I love that," Amara smiled. "But only if you let me handle the creative side. You talk too much." That evening, Daniel and Amara sat under the very mango tree where it all began, now surrounded by a small group of children from the neighborhood, kids just like they had once been. They told stories, answered questions, and handed out flyers for an initiative they'd co-founded, Lightbridge Africa, a nonprofit that trained teachers, supported parents, and educated children on safe digital practices across Nigeria. Amara turned to Daniel. "Remember when all we cared about was cartoon apps?" Daniel laughed. "And now, we're co-writing policy briefs." They both fell silent, the kind of silence that feels full, not empty. It was quiet except for the sound of distant laughter, the thud of a football, and the wind through the tree leaves above them. "I sometimes wonder," Amara said softly, "if we would have ended up here if things hadn't gone so wrong back then." Daniel thought for a moment. "Maybe not. But I know one thing for sure, what happened didn't define us. What we chose to do afterward did." A few weeks later, Daniel was invited to speak at a tech summit in Nairobi. His talk was titled, "Reclaiming Innocence, a Child's Digital Right to Grow in Peace." He stood on stage, confident, articulate, but grounded in truth. Afterward, a woman approached him with tears in her eyes. "My son went through something similar," she said. "I thought we were alone." "You're not," Daniel replied. "None of us are. And that's why we keep talking." Amara, now also working with international child safety organizations, toured schools across West Africa, using literature and storytelling to help children understand boundaries, curiosity, and consent. Her voice had power not because it was perfect, but because it had once been silenced and found its way back. Meanwhile, back in their hometown, the compound had changed. new paint, new families, a rebuilt community center, and children whose laughter once again echoed, not in confusion, but in joy. Mrs. Adewora and Mrs. Ijeoma, now local legends of sorts, were often invited to conferences. But when asked how it all started, they would smile and say the same thing. It began with a phone. But it grew with forgiveness. Epilogue. Years later, a documentary titled Echoes from the Compound aired on national television. It told the full story, painful, honest, but ultimately uplifting. It ended with a scene of Daniel and Amara, standing side by side, older now but still united. Amara's voice narrated the final line. From behind a locked door, we found the key to something greater, truth, healing, and light for others. And with that, their story became not just a lesson from the past, but a roadmap for the future. 10 years after launching Lightbridge Africa, Daniel and Amara stood together again, this time, in front of a newly built children's digital learning and therapy center in their hometown. It had taken years of fundraising, government partnerships, and unwavering dedication, but the dream was now a reality. The building bore a simple plaque at the entrance. The Lightbridge Center. In memory of the innocence lost, and the lives rebuilt. Founded by Daniel Obi and Amara Nwankwo. Daniel looked at it quietly, his heart full. "We did it," Amara whispered, standing beside him. "Yeah," he nodded. "We really did." Inside, children of all ages played educational games under supervision, read in cozy corners, or attended tech awareness workshops. In the therapy rooms, trained counselors worked with kids and teens to process digital exposure, abuse, trauma, and anxiety, many of the very things Daniel and Amara had once experienced without help. Their stories had gone far, into legislation, media, schools, churches, and international panels, but this was different. This was home. This was where the healing truly began. A quiet conversation. That evening, Daniel visited his old room, the one where everything had started. He sat on the edge of his bed, running his fingers over the old desk. Amara joined him, holding 2 cups of tea. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. "Just thinking about that day. The locked door. The fear." "And now?" she asked. "I no longer remember the fear first," he said. "I remember the turning point." Amara smiled. "That's how you know you've healed." They sat in silence, sipping tea, listening to the crickets. The same compound where everything changed was now a symbol of hope. The mango tree still stood tall, its leaves rustling in the wind like gentle applause. Closure. Mrs. Adewora and Mrs. Ijeoma were both retired now but remained active in advocacy. At a final community meeting, smaller, quieter, but full of familiar faces, they passed the baton to a new generation of parents and leaders. Their message was clear. Listen to your children. Not just their words, but their silences too. After the meeting, the 2 mothers sat together, watching young parents exchange ideas. "I used to think we failed them," Mrs. Adewora said. "No," Mrs. Ijeoma replied. "We saved them. We learned, and we chose differently." 10 years forward. In a sunlit classroom, a new teacher handed out a children's storybook. It was titled, Under the Mango Tree. The cover showed 2 kids, one with a backpack, the other with a notebook, sitting beneath a tree with a glowing light between them. A child raised her hand. "Is this a true story, Ma?" The teacher smiled. "It's inspired by one. A story about mistakes, courage, and becoming a light to others." As the children read, in another city, Daniel, now a family counselor and father of 2, finished setting up a virtual seminar on digital parenting and emotional safety. Amara, now an author of 3 best-selling books and a global child rights advocate, was on a flight to Geneva to speak at a UN youth conference. Final words. The scars of the past were not forgotten, but they were no longer burdens. They were reminders. Reminders of what it meant to fall, to rise, and to build bridges of light where darkness once ruled. And so their story ends, not in silence or shame, but in laughter, learning, and legacy. Because the door that once held in pain had been opened, and through it, the world changed. Thank you for watching. Kindly like, subscribe and comment your opinion on this story. Please stay active in our YouTube community channel. You can join so you'll be updated when new video will be posted.